to read that because you guys are busy. Mbuli, I'm going to start with you. I mean, we just watched the films, and I just want us to reflect on why Embrace decided to tell these stories. And I think the most important thing is why now?
Sure. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us. This has been a labor of love over a period of a year, and to see it sort of culminate in this moment is quite emotional. So I'm going to try to keep it together for all our sakes. Nobody likes an ugly crier. But why did we decide to tell these stories? Essentially because they needed to be told. So, you know, we are firm believers in elevating the voices and experiences of women, particularly women who have suffered this kind of violence. So obstetric violence is something in South Africa that is very normalized. You know, it's seen as a normal part of giving birth. And what we wanted to do through these films is to disrupt that narrative and to problematize the idea that this really is just the way birth is done. You know, if we had to all walk out of this auditorium and walk around our communities and ask women if they had experienced, obstetric violence, perhaps not the term because it is a fairly new term and people aren't familiar with it, but if we had to go down that list of violations that Julie spoke to earlier and ask women if they had experienced obstetric violence, the answer most likely would be yes, or I know someone who has. So obstetric violence is something that is pervasive, it's something that is prevalent in our society, but it's something that isn't spoken about or acknowledged. And it's because of a number of factors. So because of the gendered nature of it, because of the structural nature of it, because it is so deeply embedded in our systems and in our institutions, that, you know, it goes unacknowledged, unrecognized, and women don't feel like they have the right to speak about this highly private thing. And that's really what we wanted to surface and to bring to the surface, to also communicate and to Julia spoken earlier about how we frequently run birth story circles, you know, safe spaces where women can talk about obstetric violence and you know, benefit from being heard and benefit from the collective care. So we wanted to also, you know, create opportunities for that kind of experience for women who haven't experienced it before and haven't had the opportunity to either reckon with it or haven't had the experience to have been heard and to have it acknowledged.
Absolutely awesome. I mean, these films are powerful. They moved me as much as I've watched them before today. Basetsana, I'm gonna come to you. Mbuli spoke about how, you know, we look at the way in which women give birth, obstetric violence as a norm. In your work, you work with communities. How much of a norm are we talking about? I was speaking to you before we got in here about how I've been Googling stats and I don't see any. But how pervasive is this when doing the work that you do?
Well, the fact that we don't have the figures, it doesn't mean that it's not there. It's still there. It's just that it hasn't been really measured because no one has really cared. I mean, no one cares about us women, you know, because it's violence against women. It's a form of gender-based violence, really. So it hasn't really been studied, but it's really there. And the sad part is that it's normal. A lot of people actually want to speak out about obstetric violence, their experiences, but they feel like people are gonna think I'm crazy, you know, including like really serious stuff like forced sterilization. People think that no, I mean at that time it was okay. I mean a lot of our comrades, if you talk to them about their experience, they'd be like, yeah, actually my doctor said you have AIDS, so you know your children are gonna have AIDS. So yeah, that's that, you know. And the experience of one of the speakers on, I've forgotten the name. It's really common, actually. Oh, sorry. It's really common for the doctors to remove your womb without your permission and without actually telling you that they were removing your womb. Actually, one of my former roommates, they said she needed okay, they deceived her anyway, but then she later discovered that actually they were removing her womb. Yeah. So that's the sad part, that it's normalized.
Yeah. It's normalized, but what we always hear, right, and everybody would agree with me, is that the reason that it happens is because, you know, the system is understaffed, the system is under pressure, nurses are tired, there's no equipment. Are those the drivers, or is there more?
Yeah, actually, okay, the problem is the way that the public health sector addresses patient safety issues in general. It's they use like punitive methods. They just you'll find that that doctor has been transferred or that nurse has been hired, has been fired. They just focus on individual staff members involved instead of actually addressing the structural issues, the lack of equipment, the fact that there are no beds, the fact that the staff is overstretched. Yeah, those are contributors actually, but still, it's still no excuse. It's still no excuse to neglect patients, to neglect a pregnant woman, a vulnerable woman. Yeah, so there are deep structural issues, but there are also, issues with negative staff attitudes. Attitudes towards patients, attitude towards women in particular.
Yeah. Thank you. Basi, you have a very interesting job. Sometimes I'm jealous. And I want to know from you, I mean, in my research and through this film, we've heard that, obstetric violence, I struggle with that term, is not considered, a criminal offense. It's not there in law. What is there in these forms of violence? We know they vary, as Julie explained in the beginning, and what is not? Where are the gaps?
100%. So, I mean, there is a rights framework when it comes to maternal rights. For example, there are policies on, maternal rights and code of conduct for nurses when it comes to that sphere. There's also various other legislation that we have in place. For example, there's the Sterilization Act, there's the Termination Act as well. We've also got the National Health Rights Act. All of these are anchored on Section 27 of the Constitution. And so there's already broad sort of rights legislation and policies, but what is missing is obstetric violence. What is missing is the identification of obstetric violence as a form of gender-based violence. And so what we find usually is that because we don't have the definition set out, as Julie was starting to help us define obstetric violence, because there is no definition, it's very hard for women to identify themselves as victims of obstetric violence. And so that has an effect on a number of other procedures. And I know Bongi might go into a little bit of this, but then we have issues around medical records, around issues of prescription, and in particular prescription, where if you don't know that you've been violated, well, the time really clicks when you have been violated. You might or may not be aware that you've been violated. But if something happened to you in 2007 and you're coming today to say, oh, I've heard about obstetric violence, I've suffered obstetric violence, the question is, will your case be taken on? The question is, will you be able to beat prescription in those type of circumstances? So really, CALS's work in this particular field has been to populate public education, doing a lot of awareness drives, a lot of community work that we've been doing, particularly with our partners who work in mine-affected communities, Makua and Wamua, for example, and we've done a lot of these projects, and I mean, the stories that come out are quite similar to what we've heard here today.
You jumped me. It's okay. Thank you so much for that. Bongi, I'm going to come to you. I mean, you've shared your story a lot. I mean, we shared a space sharing our stories, and I think it's a powerful story, but your story is about justice. What kind of barriers have you experienced trying to get justice for yourself?
If I were to narrate every detail of the barriers I've encountered, it would literally be in the morning. I remember the very first day I went to the MEC's office. A certain doctor came to me and said to me,
Sorry, Bongi.
Can we have
Can you
her
just give us
sound?
1 second?
Okay. This second doctor said to me, the NEC is not here. You'll have to talk to me, whatever that you want to talk about. And I said to him,
Thank you.
and I said to him, if the MEC is busy, I'll wait because this meeting has been confirmed. So she's aware that we're supposed to have a meeting. And he then said to me, I just said to you, she will not be able to see you. And I said, I just said, I'll wait. And he said to me, do you know who I am? And by that, I knew that this is going to be a very tough journey. And you know, because I was filled with so much anger, I was very rebellious. I said to him, judging from your question, it means you call the shots here. But unfortunately, at this moment, I'm more important than you because I'm a key stakeholder. I actually pay tax. You're on my payroll. So I've had to. I've had to be rude. You know, as a black child, you're told that you respect your elders, you know, and when I walked in there, I had that attitude that I need to respect my elders. But believe you me, very soon I had to realize that I have to be rude, I have to push back, I have to do and be anything that I need to be that moment. Issue of prescription, as Basi has mentioned, it's a huge barrier because you know what happens is that, as she mentioned, you're not aware at that time or don't realize that you've been violated. And when you find it, and also sometimes you are aware, but you don't have the strength to deal with the system because it's very difficult, it's very draining, talking from my experience. So that also is an issue because you just get someone or attending that will tell you that we cannot assist you because your med is prescribed. And how many people have actually taken that answer and went back with it at home and they've never done anything about it today? A recent event, I wrote to the previous public protector. And when I did a follow-up now, when there's an acting public protector, I was told that, oh, sorry, we can't assist you because the public protector that initiated the conversation is suspended. Still, I had to push back.
So you're still trying to get justice today? Because I wanted to ask you, where is your case currently?
My case is everywhere. That's the honest truth. My case is everywhere. You go to the public protector, I have the HPCSA, the Ombuds, National Health Department, CGE, Human Rights Commission, Department of Women and Children. My case is literally everywhere. With calls, we're very grateful for calls. There's a light, you know, and we're thankful to Embrace for being here. But if we're to talk about the barriers, honestly, it would help to be.
And your daughter is how old?
She's 17 now.
She's 17 years
17
old.
years. Yeah.
And she's still seeking justice. Basi, what rights of Bongis have been violated in her journey of trying to seek justice in a country that has the best constitution in the world?
Right, so it's a various number of rights, you know, and how I see it is that I think the Maputo Protocol, specifically Article 14, 1 and 2, really sets out the various rights that women have when it comes to sexual and reproductive health rights. So one of them is your right to choose when to have children. It seems like it's something quite simple, but you find that there's a lot of rights violations. Specifically, they manifest in sort of like your verbal abuse, you're a child, why are you pregnant? You're pregnant again, stop having children. There's also rights around when to practice your fertility, so rights around fertility, I beg your pardon. Then we've also got rights to access contraceptives as well. And I know that Section 27 does a lot of work together with TAC around issues of accessing contraceptives, stockouts in hospitals, etc. So then the second part of, you know, the Article 14.2 really speaks to the state's obligations and what the state's obligations are in making sure that that Bongekile and women like Bongekile don't get violated. And some of those range to preventative measures. What is the state going to do to prevent the harm that is currently taking place with women across South Africa, for example? What are they going to do to protect women from these violations and from this particular form of violence against women? what does prosecution and punishment look like in this particular sector, as we know that you've been through so many processes. What is the prosecution? What are the responsibilities of the prosecution in that particular space? Because you can, you can go and report this matter to the police, right? But where does that go from there? And there's sort of quite a lot of issues around that. And what does punishment look like?
Yeah.
Are we punishing the individual nurses? Are we punishing the individual doctors? From where are we tackling it? Is it systemic? And really, we need conversations around what punishment looks like in this particular space.
It sounds exhausting. It's been 17 years. You work with communities, Kosi, and the power dynamics of the health system, the health professionals, the doctors. I mean, I also had a child young and I was scared to ask questions and vilified for asking questions, really. Are you finding that women in communities are scared of speaking up about the issues they face, the violence they face from the healthcare system?
Yeah, that's a very serious one, especially with issues related to giving birth. It's a very sensitive and private event. So it's very difficult for women to talk about it. And there's a lot of shame, surrounding having experienced obstetric violence. So once you start the conversation, actually a lot of people come up. You can just speak to a few people and then 50 people get 50 phone calls. Women experience this thing, still experience it, but it's very difficult to talk about it. That's actually one of the things, one of the reasons why it keeps going on, because no one talks about it,
Yeah. And Bongi, through Hopeville, what are you trying to achieve? What have you been achieving since it started?
Most of all, awareness. We're here today because we're talking about it. We are promoting dialogues. And most of all, supporting the community, we can relate, we understand each other. It's not easy, like we've been saying, it's not easy to open up to anyone and just discuss, the details of your horrific stories. But when we have each other, we're a community, we understand each other, we support each other, and my sisters are here. It's good, we've built that community, and that's the essence of Hopeville.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's amazing work. And thank you, sisters, for being here. Mbuli, give us a picture of, we are sitting here and wondering, what does respectful maternal care look like for Embrace, and what does Embrace want the healthcare system to achieve?
Okay, so respectful maternity care are recommendations by the WHO, so the World Health Organizations, and really speaks to the kind of care, the kind of intrapartum care that women should be receiving. One that guarantees, women's right to dignity, to confidentiality, and to really their basic human rights being respected. The recognition that birth is not just a medical process, but it's a human experience, and that experience needs to be protected and held, and free from harm. It also it goes one step further and speaks to the kind of training that healthcare professionals should be receiving. And it's not just training on, the medical side of things, but it also has to deal with, interpersonal skills. It has to do with the training on the values of respectful maternity care. And it also has to do with resourcing and providing enabling environments for healthcare workers, to perform their functions in a way that really supports this ethic of respectful maternity care. So, of course, he's already spoken about some of the systemic and structural drivers of obstetric violence, which very much lie in the constraints and the issues in our very broken healthcare system. So it looks at all of those things, and we have an iteration of it in our current or in the latest maternity has a very long name, Maternal Health Guidelines. So I would encourage us to, to go away and have a look at that. But then once again, South Africa is known for our amazing policies, like there we are with our policies, a beacon of light for everything constitutional and everything amazing. But the reality is, these policies mean absolutely nothing if they aren't implemented, and if they aren't implemented from the perspective of the women who are accessing these healthcare services.
Oh, thank you so much. And Basi, there are probably women here and people here either who've been through obstetric violence or know someone who have. While it's not in law as such, what can people do if they want to walk out of here and feel like, I want justice for myself because that happened to me?
Right, they can call CAS. But other than that, on a real note, so I'm going to basically reiterate the road that Bongekile has walked, right? So it's the HPCSA. So experiences for women vary, as we've also heard from the videos. But it's one of those important steps to show that you are actually trying to follow up on your case. So that's one of the avenues. The other avenue is, of course, contacting the health ombudsman. You can open a criminal case. There are some limitations, particularly if you're trying to take your case to court. Now, one of the things is any sort of malpractice type of case is really attractive to a lot of attorneys, but it's also quite an expensive undertaking. And so what you normally find is that the women will hand over their medical records, and when the attorneys want them to pay for certain disbursements that the women cannot afford, more often than not, they keep that medical record or that file until such a time as they can pay to get that file and retrieve their files back. So that's also quite a tricky sort of landscape, but it is something that happens. And so one of the main barriers then is access to justice through the courts. It's an expensive process. If you don't have pro bono or other organizations that you're partnering with to get your case through, it becomes quite a hindrance. And so the question is, how do we tackle obstetric violence through advocacy and research? And how do we partner and make sure that we're bolstering on that level? But we do have some flyers, I think, at the back, which are CAL's flyers, and you can reach out to the numbers that you'll see on that flyer, or reach out to ourselves in Brace. We have partners from Section 27 as well in the House. And so just to give you an idea of the various groups and the various channels that you can engage with to find justice.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to invite you guys to ask our panel questions. If you have any, you can go now. I see one at the back. I see one there. Gentlemen at the back, you can go first.
Thank you very much. There's very few guys in here, but thank you very much for the panel this year. Everyone is here, and for giving this thing a name. It didn't have a name. It looked like something that happens all the time and is normal. And thank you for giving it a name. My experience or my witness with obstetric violence was when I was a fourth-year medical student, like the other speaker on the video. Similar, a nurse inflicting pain on a defenseless, vulnerable girl, a teenager, who was giving birth. And it was shocking, and you don't know, you think maybe it's something, that happens all the time here, and you don't know what to name it. And thank you for giving it a name. And, as I went on with my practice and working in government hospitals and clinics, so you saw the same thing happening, and, all the time. There are good nurses and there are good doctors, but those few, I don't know if they're few or if it's just something that happens, verbal and physical abuse extends from antenatal care through to birth, labor, to postnatal care. And we continue to see it all the time. I continue to see it all the time. It is an emotional thing, and you cannot avoid being emotional when this thing, when you talk about it. So being a doctor, you experience all these things. But also, there's an overarching, overlooking all of these is our government and Department of Health and different institutions of government that are overlooking all of this abuse and actually stalking it, making it harder to expose it or to make it easier for people who want to do their work properly, making it harder for them to work. I'm also a traditional leader in a small village in the northwest, Tlokweing, Silvergrounds. Our clinic is a birthing center. It's a 24-hour clinic. For more than 10 years, our clinic did not have running water. And mothers who were supposed to come give birth had to bring a 20 liter of water with them. Until the community and us got funding to put water in there to the toilets can flush and water can be provided in there. And despite repeated meetings with the Department of Health, nothing has happened. Up to so far, the Department of Health has no idea or does not have any records of water going into the clinic. It is working now due to the efforts of the community raising funds. And this is facilitated, all this violence is facilitated by the government, by officials, which Bongi was saying, we are paying their taxes.
Yeah. And
so I'm glad I'm here because I want to, we have the best constitution in the world and we've got rights.
I am going to ask you to...
Yeah,
so we can
just 20 seconds. And until the people rise up, until we make these people accountable, nothing's going to happen with these rights. We'll have the best constitution in the world, but nothing's going to happen. So I'm here to say that we should stand up and we should be active and we should make these people do what they're supposed to do. Thank you.
Thank you. The lady in white there. Can I ask you to just keep your comment brief and then get to your question? Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, thank you for having this evening. I was very excited when I saw the invite. I've been following Embrace for a while on social media. Not sure if you saw that. But anyway, I'm a non-practicing midwife and an advanced neonatal nurse. So that's my speciality. When the cord is cut, that's where I like to work. However, the laboring mother is extremely close to my heart because that is where the fetus home is for 40 weeks. I am involved in professional reporting for litigation cases. I hear what you say about the lawyers and the litigation cases, but I've seen horrible stories. I've also had the privilege to be, I don't know if it is privilege, but it is a privilege because now I can see what happens in the public sectors. I am invited to unannounced Department of Health visits to public hospitals. And I actually feel traumatized of seeing what is happening. It's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking. Not just for me, myself, but the parents and the little babies that's a new little life. So the reason why I wanted to talk to you is it was said that avenues to seek justice is to go to the HPCSA, the Ombudsman, and SAPS. But I'm sure, and that's my question, I'm sure you have also reached out or referred to SANC, the South African Nursing Council, and that's my question. What was your response? And then I close with the reason why I want this question answered. And I'm really standing here very boldly and humbly. I'm advocating for our nurses, all categories of nurses, to have continuous development or short learning training or programs. They need it. It's a fact. And I'm asking your help on that.
Yeah, firstly.
Well, to quickly respond to you, I mean, SANC is once again, the various instruments and mechanisms through which people can go and try to get justice. But part of the future of this work is really going to be working closely with health professionals, nurses and doctors, etc. And so I think that's coming in the future. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about the work that you do and how we can really work together. I know that TAG also does a lot of work in that space.
Yeah. It's you, yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hi, Julie. I've had the honor of working with Julie the past couple of months, and it's been an eye-opener for me to obviously, understand a little bit more about obstetric violence. Because I just wanted to find out, because I didn't actually get the opportunity to, I wanted to know exactly how Embrace feels like obstetric violence should be included in the National Strategic Plan. Basi, I know Kals is also working on something along that, and if you could just possibly expand on the various ways in which you feel like the NSP could be strengthened, I suppose, to include obstetric violence or the acknowledgement of obstetric violence as, GBV issue. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to take that one, Ngudi?
Yeah,
Can you-
and I can, why am I grabbing?
Can you first explain what the National Strategic Plan is?
Okay. All right. So thank you. Very good question. We hadn't discussed that in detail. So thanks. So the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence is a plan to address gender-based violence, a multi-sectoral sort of plan, and it really happened after 2018. There was total shutdown with a nationwide call for the president to effectively address gender-based violence in South Africa. What followed then was a presidential summit. That was the first one, bringing together stakeholders, who are either affected by gender-based violence or working in the space to address it. And then following that initial presidential summit came the second presidential summit, which we've just come from. And what was quite significant about this one was that, there were a number of action caucuses, and those action caucuses focused on key vulnerable groups that had been excluded essentially from the iteration as it currently stands of the National Strategic Plan. And one of those was a caucus for pregnant persons. And what we were really looking at was how do we include obstetric violence in policy? You can't really address something effectively that has not been legislated for. So if we had to look at the National Strategic Plan, where exactly would it sit, or how would we situate it within that framework? So the National Strategic Plan has a number of different pillars, including accountability, healing and restoration. There are 6 of them. You can go back and read about them. Research and information management, for example. And under research and management, for example, what we are calling for is a national prevalence study on obstetric violence, so we can understand the extent of the problem, and so that we can begin to address it effectively. So it isn't, something that sort of sits as, as something in academia or even popular conversation, but that we have numbers that we can quantify the problem, we can effectively address it. So really essentially looking at the National Strategic Plan, the 6 different pillars, and exactly how to situate obstetric violence under those pillars and how to effectively address it from that framework. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw you. You can go ahead.
Hello. I'm actually a midwife practicing, and this brings me a lot of shame mentioning it now. But so here's the thing, right? When I'm admitting a patient in labor ward, and she's in labor, she's in pain, she seems very scared. And as soon as I show her her room and all of that, I'm very calm. I'm like, what's wrong? Why are you so scared? They then break down their stories of these horrors that they had with their first baby. And they say, Sister Lato, you are so much better than the other one. And they relay their stories, and they're horrific. They're horrible. And I'm standing there. I had so much pride in welcoming her into the ward. And now I'm just sitting and I don't know what to do with myself because it's so embarrassing. So my question is, what can I do as a practicing midwife in this type of situation where they're obviously they're not confident enough and they don't want to share their story with anybody else. They have done so because I've shown them a different side. So what can I do? Because I spend the whole day hearing these horrible stories about their past. Thank you. Oh, hi, ma'am.
Who wants to take it?
Not me.
Not me. You want to take it? Yeah, of course. You can go. No, she has a mic.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that and for being one of the good ones in the public. You're public, right? Yeah. Okay, what you can do is, first of all, one of the things you can do is prevent further, the events of obstetric violence, because these things, one of the things that perpetuates it is that other healthcare workers keep quiet when they see it happening, So you can play a role. You too.
Yeah. The fear of victimization is real, even in that space.
Yeah, because of
Victimization,
of how they address these issues. Yeah, you can try and and not keep quiet and without getting fired. But anyway, another thing that you can do is you can refer. I mean, you're here in this room. You can always refer them to, the avenues we've spoken about, HPCA, the Nursing Council. Yeah, I think there's a lot that you can do. It's one of the good ones. Thank you.
Okay. Nolwazi, I saw you. I'm going to have 2 questions. Sorry? Okay. Yeah? Next.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So I've got twofold, if I may. So the first one is to embrace if they've got any women in the network who use drugs, because so I'm a researcher in addiction care, and I've seen the greatest obstetric violence reported by women who use drugs. Going into withdrawal, already the stigma of using drugs. And so I don't know how many women in Embrace are using drugs and their stories have been told, and whether you've worked with Sandput, which is the South African people who use drugs, and I think that would be a great collaboration, and supporting women who use drugs and sensitizing, especially antenatal and labor wards as to the type of care that's needed for women who use drugs. Because their births most of the time are violent, or their pregnancies are violent. And they also get denied termination of pregnancy. So they without choice, have to carry that pregnancy. Then my second one is my other hat as a lecturer down the road. So I, like Lerato, am ashamed because I remember as a student and as a healthcare professional, I was complicit in obstetric violence through my silence. But I was complicit because of the victimization, and now I still feel complicit because our students do reflective journals of their obstetric. So we teach clinical associates, and this is a new cadre. And they are reflecting on obstetric violence seen by other healthcare professionals, so a nurse or a doctor. And here we are trying to disrupt it and make them patient-centered. But there's issues of professional identity in that, I'm a new kid on the block. How am I going to tell these health professionals that have been here for the hundreds of years that this is what they're doing? So firstly, we also never had the language. And here these 19-year-olds, 21-year-olds, whose preceptors have years of experience, and they're struggling through their professional identity, and they're supposed to advocate for this woman, so they know it's wrong. Yeah. And then on top of that, you've got the idea that at the end of the day, where do these women go? So mine is to encourage you to come to our division, come to our family medicine department. We are open to have you engage with our students. And I think that's actually a good place to start, is before we graduate, create those change agents. So I'm happy to say, us at the family medicine, we would love to have you. We'll find an academic day. We'll disrupt the timetable if we have to.
You want to take the question about the drugs?
About women who use.
Yeah.
So no, we haven't dealt with or worked with women who use as a sort of key population, but in our work, we engage with women across the spectrum. So that's definitely something that we would, be happy to engage with you about. Please find us in the foyer. Let's exchange details and let's have the conversation. We'd really like to take that forward, and absolutely. So part of our strategy, as Hao has mentioned, going into next year is engaging students, get them while they aren't so immersed in that culture, and disrupt some of the narrative. So definitely. And thank you so much for coming. Yeah.
I am a really nice person, but I only have space for one more question, and it's going to Nolwazi because she's had her hand up. Nolwazi is so sweet. She's kinder than me, so you can go ahead. This is the last question we will have for the night.
Okay, so I'm very honored. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I'm also ashamed. I am a junior doctor in public at the moment. And there are three questions that I have for you. Firstly, the speaker who welcomed us and introduced us today spoke about the importance of xenophobic violence and obstetric violence. And that's something that's very close to my heart. I did my internship at Rahima Musa. 60% of the deliveries at Rahima Musa are deliveries of foreign nationals. Where and what stories, the stories of the 4 women today are South African nationals, but I'd be very interested to hear the experiences of foreign nationals in our hospitals, because the levels of violence that they go through, and myself, looking back at this, I'm like, oh my God, Claire, I've been a perpetrator of that violence. When you say to a woman, she needs to go for an emergency C-section and you need consent for it, and she doesn't speak English, and you're looking on Google Translate, or you're saying, call your husband. She's Ethiopian, and her husband was in Ethiopia. And she had to call the nearest shopkeeper who, just all the levels of violence just that she had to go through in order for me to sign consent to take the emergency C-section. So I think the stories of foreign nationals is imperative in this experience. Secondly, I'm not quite sure, I've heard some of the stories about private versus public. I work in public, but my peers are patients in private. And when I hear their stories at Park Lane, I'm like, this is no different to Rahima Musa. You're just paying more for less. If you came to me, I could do your MBA and I would give you all the drugs in the world. But I've had to sit with friends who've gone because they've decided to have a termination. And we've had less, they've been given 2 Panados, less drugs than the women who come to my hospital. So I think the stories of private, when you talk about the prevalence, there's a lot more that's happening in private, and because people have paid for it, paid for the service, they think, well, this, you know, I'm better off than I was, when in actual fact, maybe they'd be better if they came down the road to Rahima or Barra or wherever we are. And I think the third thing, which is sad, I'm not sure how it is with the midwives, but this is the sense in medicine, is that people, the smart people, don't pick obstetrics. So the work is left to junior doctors. The HPCSA requires us each to do 10 C-sections in order to pass the obstetric block.
Sure.
I did obstetrics. My first day of internship started on the first day of the level 5 lockdown. I was at Rahima Musa. I had to do, we did 16,000 deliveries that year. So you're just pushing the queue, cutting, you know, whether the sutures look nice afterwards, that poor woman with that scar, whether those sutures look nice, you know, you're just pushing the queue. And you forget that this woman is walking around with a scar, physical and emotional, of that experience.
Yeah.
And then at the end of it, when you, like me in my community service here, you're sent out somewhere, and you, the junior, are the one that has to do that emergency C-section. There's no seniors who want to come and do it. And if you call a senior, I mean, you're disturbing their sleep, you know, whatever. Whereas in surgery, for an appendicitis, you never send a junior intern to go and remove that appendix. You'll send the senior doctor to do it. And let's be honest, is a person going to die of an appendicitis? No. But could a woman die in labor through an emergency C-section? Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
When I've said I want to do obs and gynae, I've had people, my peers and seniors, say to me, but we thought you were smarter than that. We thought you were clever. Why don't you want to do something else? So what you're having is people who end up in obs and gynae being either not interested, it's a job, so they're just going to be there to push the queue, and they're not going to give what you're talking about, what being the disruptor, they're not there to disrupt the status quo. So my thing, to piggyback on my colleague here, is this is important as part of, whether you're a nurse, a doctor, as part of your medical school education, you need to be exposed to this topic. And you need to, not on a day when they don't want to be at university, on a day when they have to be attended, because it is so, it's vital. It's the juniors that are interacting with patients.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. And I do know there are questions, so our panelists will be outside if you want to have a chat with them. Thank you guys so much. And thank you guys. You've been great. It was tough at the end keeping time, but you were amazing. And thank you guys for joining us.